Listen up, everyone. A new metric measuring intelligence has just dropped, and the survey says if you're a Romantasy reader, you're an idiot. Or at least it does according to this creator.
And that the most popular romantasy fiction is conservative propaganda for straight women with a patriarchy kink. So, with that in mind, I wasn't particularly surprised when I realised that romantasy galleys don't like this book, this really fantastic work of romantic fantasy fiction. This is What Fury Brings by Trisha Levenseller, a fantastic piece of feminist romantasy. It's a book that flips a lot of romantasy tropes on their heads, as well as the story beats as well. It tells the story of a large, powerful princess who kidnaps a prince from a neighbouring nation. Her nation is a matriarchy and his a patriarchy. She kidnaps him with a view to marrying him in order to prove that she is the strongest between her and her cousin, who are both competing for the throne. And so many romantasy galleys are getting up in arms about this book, saying that it's not very nice seeing a man get kidnapped and abused by a woman. They don't see the hypocrisy there. And the thing that really gets me about this is the key difference between this and so many of the books that it is poking fun of and satirizing. The fact that in the Thing of Things and Things style romantasy books, so often a powerful and dangerous man kidnaps a woman who is a second-class citizen already in a patriarchal society and does with her what he will. He humiliates and abuses her. In this book, it's not just a flip of that. She doesn't take a guy off the street who is a second-class citizen in her matriarchy and does with him as she will. No. She takes a powerful prince from a patriarchal system and shows him what it's like to see the world through eyes that he's never had. In his society, for example, they don't have a word for the R word, the terrible awful thing that men do to women and other men. The narrative in this book, the themes of this book aren't just showing us that a matriarchy would be better, but rather showing us through a matriarchy how a patriarchy is bad. But instead, so many romantasy girlies are reading What Fury Brings and going, oh, it's so uncomfortable, oh, that poor man, oh, I don't like the way he's being kidnapped and abused, oh, it's so emasculating. And yet romantasy girlies, when it happens to a woman, suddenly it's hurt. You need to think about that.
Now, I don't think it comes to anyone's surprise that this video has generated controversy. If you've been online, let alone in the book community, things like this tend to catch fire pretty quickly. Honestly, the only thing about this that I'm surprised about is that it's taken so long for this to happen, because this creator, who goes by the name WillowTalksBooks here on BookTube, has been talking about romantasy books in this way for at least half a year. I know this because she posted videos talking about books in this light before, where she put forth her view that all popular romantasy books are quote-unquote conservative propaganda, which she communicates in a video titled "Romantasy Books Are Toxic Conservative Propaganda." Now, I actually wanted to make a video addressing this topic back when I first watched this video, largely because while I like romantasy, I actually did see some credit to what Willow was talking about regarding the prevalence of problematic messaging in romantasy books. But I was very turned off by the very black and white oriented approach she took in her video, as people have pointed out regarding this TikTok, to present herself as morally and intellectually superior to romantasy readers, or rather, as she calls them, romantasy girlies, which is a topic we're going to touch upon a bit later. This video was obviously highly criticized for the condescending words and attitude. The same is true of these other videos. Now, I don't think this by any means justifies any of the hate that she's been getting. I don't think it's appropriate for anyone to hate on anyone, which is why I'm even talking about this situation in the first place, because I think it was inappropriate for Willow to say what she has, but I also think it's inappropriate for people to say what they have to her as well, and to come after her in her personal life as well, because after this controversy, Willow has now decided to take a break from her channel, which I think is probably the best move, but we are going to talk a little bit more later about that particular video, because to me it does come across as she's sort of dismissing taking accountability for. And part of the reason why I did not make this video about romantasy and my own opinions and how they differ and are also similar to Willow's is largely because I've been scared to. I mean, this whole controversy has been generated largely because this is something that people are really passionate about, and it's also something that I'm very passionate about. I love reading books, I love romantasy books, I love fantasy books, I love all books, but I think when it comes to internet discourse, especially internet discourse here in the book community, actually listening and interacting respectfully with people you disagree with is rather rare. And I think from my perspective, I think to be able to weigh in on this debate about romantasy, I felt that I've needed to become more familiar with the genre, and in doing so, I found both books that I have liked, loved, and hated. Thus, I find it a bit problematic that Willow seemingly did not take this approach. Now, I don't think that the video is entirely without nuance, and I'm talking specifically about the YouTube video. I think the TikTok video is a lot more inflammatory, and I believe that this is because Willow has been getting away with talking about romantasy books and romantasy readers in this light for over half a year. If you actually go on to her YouTube channel, which I'm probably not going to link below because I don't want any anyone to send hate to her, but the first video that pops up is actually a video where she is talking about books that she has liked, and it starts off with her going on like a whole 3-minute rant about how much she dislikes romantasy books and thinks that you're trash if you like ACOTAR.
You are probably reading the wrong books, and that sounds horribly pretentious, but luckily, being pretentious isn't actually a bad thing. It's just anti-intellectualism. So what do I mean by the wrong books? Well, that. Here in the UK, the big bookseller chain is called Waterstones. And I was browsing the Waterstones website, looking at what's new and upcoming. And on the one hand, I was thrilled to see that most of what was being pushed to the front and center for everyone to look at was fantasy and fiction in translation. I then felt as quickly deflated when I realized that all of the fantasy fiction that I was seeing were lazy carbon copies of the already exhausted romantic fantasy genre and all of the terrible toxic tropes that it involves. Read the blurb of any upcoming romantasy book, and just like A Court of Thorns and Roses and so many other big romantasy books, the blurb will read like, as I've said in the past, a piece of conservative heteronormative propaganda, wherein a young woman falls in love with a brutal, horrible fairy man. I'm so sick of it. And it's all that we see now in the world of fantasy.
Which, obviously people are allowed to have their own opinions, but I personally do not understand why this is the first video that you want new people to your channel to see is a video of you attacking people for liking a popular book. I personally don't get why this is the approach that she has chosen to go with, and I don't get how this has endeared anyone towards her content because it has done nothing but turn me away. And we're actually going to talk a little bit about that because I have actually watched her channel for quite a number of years and used to have a more positive opinion about her. So this original video I don't think was made entirely without nuance, as Willow does mention some romantasy books and has made follow-up videos about romantasy books that she likes, including a video that I also think is a little bit problematic, which is called All the Good Romantasy Books Are Gay, of which I'll come back to a bit later. In the TikTok, she sets up the similar dichotomy between what romantasy fans or girly like versus what she likes, and a message moralizing and presenting herself as more intelligent than others based on the book she liked and some of the reactions to the book from romantasy girlies who she's criticizing. The book in question is actually What Fury Brings by Trisha Levenseller. I haven't actually read this book, but I am personally interested in reading it. I read about 5 of her books before and I have some mixed opinions, but I'm still excited to see what she does in this book, especially because this is her first book that is officially in the adult as opposed to YA genres. The ones that I have read from her before are the first book in the Daughter of the Pirate King series, and then also the 2 books in the Shadows Between Us duology, 2 books in the Bladesmith series, I believe it's called. However, oddly enough, I actually think that Trisha Levenseller's books falls more to the category of romantasy books that Willow has been critical towards, which I think shows off how a preconceived notion about the morals of a particular genre can shape one's interpretation of that genre before even engaging with it. Because I think that if Willow was reading any one of Trisha Levenseller's other books, she would not have had such a positive experience with reading it. Now, that isn't to say that I think that it's bad that Willow had this positive experience. I think it's actually good, just because I think it's good that people find books that they like, and also I'm happy that this story found people that it resonates with. Now, this one has kind of caused a bit of controversy online in general. It is meant to be a more adult dark fantasy that is basically turning the patriarchy on its head by having women enact the same type of violence against men that men have historically enacted against women. There have been a lot of mixed opinions. One creator that I have heard talk about this book is Bree from 4 Paws in a Book, and I will link the video where she does talk about this down below because I think she did a very good job at explaining some of the themes and topics in this book and why readers might feel uncomfortable about it. And I personally can't provide that much detail because I have not yet read this book, but I think that provides a bit of a backdrop as to sort of why this caught some controversy, because people are also being critical of Willow for having liked this book, largely because she is presenting it as a sort of subversive, empowering novel about women, when I think the author's intention was more so to provide a critique of the patriarchy by reversing the gender roles. Once again, I haven't read it, so I don't 100% know, and I do understand why from that setup a lot of readers have been turned off from reading it. I personally am still interested in reading it. However, one book that Willow did mention liking in the original YouTube video, The Hurricane Wars, which is actually one that I have read. I decently enjoyed this, although I didn't really actually like the romance side of this. I actually liked more of the fantasy elements, and what Willow in particular sort of complements is the world building. And for me, I'm sort of mixed on this front as well, because I think the world building was very interesting, but the execution in this was not good. The author conducts the world building by, in almost every chapter, full on halting the action of the story to insert a multi-page info dumping session, oftentimes repeating information she has already stated in one of the previous info dumping sessions about the world building. Literally on page 7, which is literally one of the first pages in this book, the proper noun title of one of the countries, which is called Nenevar, is repeated not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 5 separate times is the same name of the same country repeated. And for me, I honestly felt like this book was treating me like I was an idiot, which was part of the reason why I didn't like this book, is that I felt like it was insulting my intelligence by constantly repeating the same information that I already knew over and over again. Now, I'm not giving this critique to delegitimize or challenge Willow's own positive interpretation or view of this book, but rather illustrate the importance of how subjective our interpretations of books are. Because I personally don't think that it's right to put forth an argument that an entire genre and its readers are problematic and are spreading quote-unquote conservative propaganda just because you personally did not like a couple of books in that genre. It's perfectly fine to dislike or disagree with the message of a book, but it's not okay to present yourself as morally or intellectually superior on this basis. And in honesty, I'm really shocked that this even became an issue for Willow in the first place. And the reason for that is that I first found her channel about 3 years ago after I read a book called The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea by Yukio Mishima. Now, this book is not necessarily problematic solely because of its contents, but more so because of its author. For those of you who don't know, in combination with being one of the most famous Japanese authors of the 20th century, Yukio Mishima was also an ardent fascist and staunch supporter of the Japanese monarchy, who in 1970, after having built for 2 years a private militia group, staged a public coup to take over the Japanese government to reinstate the monarchy and reverse Article 9 that prevented Japan from rearmoring their military, which was one of the core surrender conditions after the end of the Second World War. Now, many of you may be wondering why it is that anyone would ever want to read Mishima's works, particularly given this problematic context, or why exactly this has anything to do with Willow. I personally was interested in this book as someone with an interdisciplinary educational background in history, politics, and literature. For me, this book is a literary work that was written by a very complicated figure during a complicated historical period engaging with problematic political ideas. On top of this, there is an additional complication to Mishima's legacy proposed by his sexuality, which a lot of his literary works address. In her video on Mishima and about The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea, Willow addresses how Mishima's queer identity was what stoked her interest in reading and talks about how Mishima's legacy made it difficult to engage with his works and gives a rather nuanced approach to interpreting the book and evaluating Mishima as a problematic historical figure, but also someone who represents a marginalized identity, particularly is a significant figure in queer history. I hope to an extent the irony is apparent, and I don't think it's only a problem for Willow, but is a wider issue with literary analysis at large, where we as an audience are only encouraged to take a nuanced approach to books where we perceive that they are intellectual enough to justify a more complex analysis. For me, this is the core issue that generated this controversy, as is also why there has been such a split in the book community about the morals and ethics around books in general, because our perceived value of a given book ends up determining how willing we are to engage with it critically. And a lot of this has has to do with how notions of intellectualism and perceived intelligence are rooted in systemic domination that has reinforced the perspectives of those who are society privileges. And I think this has led to a general divide between people who largely identify as genre fiction readers and those who might engage with more quote-unquote academic or intellectual literature like classics or nonfiction. I primarily myself read genre fiction, and I've seen a lot of others reiterate this point about how a lot of us are critical towards things like old classics and nonfiction and other academic works because many of them just empower already dominant perspectives. As well as on the flip side, a lot of classic or academic readers tend to look down on genre fiction because it's presented as being less serious, as it hasn't received the same respect from verifiable intelligence organizations like universities, the government, or international awards. Now, obviously this is a rather big generalization, as there are works that may count as both. There are plenty of authors who write genre fiction that is studied in universities like Margaret Atwood or R.F. Kuang, for example. And there are also readers who read in all of these genres. I personally myself am someone who reads from all of these genres, and I know that there's plenty more of us here on BookTube and also just in the book community at large that place no limits on which books we're willing to engage with and find books that we love across a whole spectrum of genres. However, I still feel like this dichotomy is very present, and I think the only way that we're going to start to unpack these problematic assumptions on both sides is to widen the scope of books that we're willing to engage with. And in specific to the case with Willow, I think it's also important to bring up the role that privilege plays and what issues we are willing to engage with. In Willow's case, her nuanced approach to Mishima's work was informed by her own identity in the queer community, something which I believe her video, which is All the Good Romantasy is Gay, also shows. Because what this represents to me is that Willow is more willing to engage critically and with nuance to books written by queer authors or featuring queer characters. And this is by no means a bad thing. I personally encourage everyone to look to engage with diverse literature. I also think engaging with literature critically is what we should be doing, but I think we should be applying that to any and all books that we read indiscriminately. I don't think it's appropriate on the reverse to take a more negative approach to analyzing literature that may not be diverse, or at least not diverse in the way that you can relate to, with an attitude of skepticism, just as it shouldn't be to approach books with diverse experiences that you might not relate to with skepticism either. To give an example of this, there's quite a lot of memes in the book community about typical male literature, which has largely come as a result of women's attempts to fight against patriarchy, which I think sometimes can instead encourage women away and being able to critically identify what exactly is problematic about the book outside of it being written by a man. Because from my perspective, that's not enough of a reason to make a book problematic. Just as it's not appropriate for Willow to apply the same logic to romantasy books. In her pinned comment on the original YouTube video, where she equates that romantasy authors are the same as incels, radical misogynists, and TERFs, trans-exclusionary radical feminists, because they are all united by a shared hatred of women, which in my opinion is extremely offensive to say about a group largely composed of women whose stories, even if they don't do it in the best way, are largely about trying to center women's experiences in literature from which they have largely been ignored. This by no means insinuates that some of these authors or books don't deserve to be criticized. For example, I mentioned at the start of this video, I personally agreed with some of the points that Willow was bringing up, as I've seen some of what she's talking about the conservative propaganda talking points within some of the books that I have read. Now, I don't necessarily know 100% if this is intentional though, which is why I think in particular the label of propaganda is really problematic, because propaganda is intentional. And I think a lot of the time, the problematic elements of these books might not be intentional on the parts of the author. To give some examples, some of the books that I wanted to talk about in my own video were When the Moon Hatched and Her Soul to Take. Now, in When the Moon Hatched, which is actually one of the books that Willow talks about, is on top of being poorly written, is filled, in my opinion, with a white savior complex in a lot of Orientalist attitudes. Similarly, Her Soul to Take has a main character which slut shames a victim of sexual assault so she can justify her relationship with her abuser. Both of these books are problematic, but to a certain degree, I don't know how intentional this was on the author's part. And on top of that, personally don't think it's alright to use my dislike of these books to attack others who may like. I personally take issues with them, and I do think that there are problematic aspects, and I want to talk more about them. But I don't think that the fact that I see these problematic elements means that someone else is agreeing with these problematic aspects. It could just be that my interpretation of the text is informed by different ideas. For example, I mentioned when talking about The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea that I do have an interdisciplinary educational background in history, literature, and political science. And honestly, most readers might just not have that, and that's perfectly fine. Everyone has their own interests, and those just happen to be my interests, and I also see those interests in Willow's perspective as well. However, I don't think it's right to be like, I have this educational background, that means I'm smarter than you, and that means that if you don't agree with my perspectives, then you're stupid. And if you actually are as intelligent as you are claiming, you would know that that is not the correct way to talk to people, because the basic foundation behind civil discourse is to be kind towards other people and to not center yourself, because you do not exist at the center of the universe and not everything revolves around you, and you are not always right about everything. I think at large maybe this is just an issue because a lot of people don't perceive romantasy books as being deserving of a critical treatment. For some, this might just be that they don't like to take a critical perspective when they're reading for entertainment, which I think is fine. I think everyone has the capacity to make their own decisions on how they want to treat these things. However, I don't think it's right to on the reverse be like books have no political meaning behind them because everything is political. There was a big discussion about this at the beginning of the year, particularly in conversation with attempts at book banning that have been going on. But if the way that you like to read is to just read books for fun, I think that's perfectly fine. And I don't think that it's right for anyone to try and make you change that. I do think, for me personally, like engaging critically with the books that I read. There are certain times that I might just not be doing this as much. For example, there are some books that I liked that I know are not the best and do have problematic elements, but I still enjoyed them. And on top of that, my enjoyment of these books does not mean that I have to ignore these issues with the book. For example, I really enjoyed the ACOTAR series. However, I don't think by any means that it's perfect, but I really do love these books and I enjoy discussing them with people, which includes discussing the problematic aspects of them. And I think that there is room to love something, to like it, and to talk about it, and still take on the nuanced perspective. And I think the same is also true to authors in a certain extent, because like it or not, there is no formal education or training process to become an author, and in many ways this is both liberating and problematic. Liberating as it allows people to operate outside of traditional institutions enforcing dominance, but limiting because it often allows people with privilege to wield it to their advantage. Because of this, it's extremely difficult to regulate who gets to be an author, and thus I honestly think there are many who simply might just be unaware to why other readers might find their books problematic, because they just might not have the educational background to realize the more complex systems or systemic ideas that make the issues that they're bringing up in their books to be problematic. And I think that's more so the case for something like When the Moon Hatched, because in my opinion, this book is actually based on the Dothraki from George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones, which is where the sort of Orientalist critique kind of comes in, because it's not really based on like a historical culture as much as it is based on an already established caricature of historic cultures, which been a lot of scholars who have sort of like evaluated them specifically from the framework of Orientalism, which was first established by Edward Said, who is a scholar of Middle East history and political science. So I will try and link some maybe like articles that I can find down below talking a bit more about this, but I do think from a personal standpoint that this is just an aspect of oversight on the author's part, more so than any intentional desire to inflict, as Willow called it, conservative propaganda. And also, in me sharing this opinion, I'm not at all trying to attack or make anyone feel bad for having liked this book. I personally didn't like it on a multitude of levels, but I can see elements of why someone would enjoy this. So don't take this as me trying to be critical or insinuate that you're unintelligent or whatnot if you like this book. I think it's perfectly fine to like any book and to have any opinion on it, just as it's valid for me to have a critical opinion about this book. And I think to a certain extent, for there to be as much, freedom and creativity within the book community, we're simply just gonna have to be okay with the fact that not every story is going to work for everyone, and that there are going to be problematic aspects in books, largely because there is no way to really give any conversation or message of depth without being quote-unquote problematic, because what is problematic is so dependent upon the person who is reading or engaging with that material. And this doesn't mean that we can't criticize any author or point out problematic content or even take action against things like boycotting or sharing negative reviews online, or in some extreme cases even taking legal action against, but rather to acknowledge that sometimes people make mistakes, and mistakes should be used as learning opportunities and chances to take accountability and make changes accordingly, rather than as an excuse to hate on someone. And this goes both towards Willow and towards the book community who was sending hate towards her. I think in both cases, people are in the wrong for having attacked someone in the first place. And to me at least, I think this represents at present that the book community is extremely divided and lacks nuance in our discourse that has shaped this controversy amongst various others. But we don't have to be this way. We have the power to change things, and I think the expressions of hurt coming from both sides of this conflict should encourage us in the direction of making changes to our rhetoric and how we address each other. Additionally, I think this discussion around privilege harkens back to Willow's positioning of romantasy girlies. As for a lot of women, the word girlies is very infantilizing, and paired with Willow's condescending tone and words, I think is very easily to see why romantasy readers who are primarily women, who in many ways have felt like their intelligence has been criticized unfairly not just by men but also fellow women, is what made the reaction to this video so incendiary. I agree with what a lot of people have said about this video, radiating with quote-unquote mean girl energy, and I think that it's important to bring up because in her apology videos, Willow has brought up her trans identity and struggles with depression to shield, blame, and not take accountability for what she said. I don't think anyone should receive hate like this, and as someone who also struggles with depression, I understand where she is coming from, but I personally just felt like this was very similar to the situation with the author of The Age of Scorpius, where they used their autistic identity to erase their horrible reaction to constructive criticism. Willow, in my opinion, is doing the same thing, and this is not at all to excuse any transphobic or otherwise hurtful things people have said or done towards her, but is to say that marginalized people can be in the wrong too. And acting as if any marginalized person shouldn't be held accountable for their actions is frankly discriminatory, as it robs the marginalized person of their identity by not according to them the capacity to do something wrong. In this specific case, the discussion around mean girl rhetoric is well-founded, and it's something that Willow amongst others should work to address, and to me, in particular, her accusation in a pinned comment on her own YouTube video, which has been up for months, grouping in romantasy authors and readers with TERFs and incels, I believe is her attempt to dismiss her own internalized misogyny. To me, this is no better than right-wing conservatives who are seeking to ban books with diversity, where they paint any book that openly talks about LGBTQIA+ issues as being sexual to justify banning them. This universalist type of rhetoric, where the perceived problems with one book are generalized without any thought to the harm this causes, has to stop. Each book deserves to be respected, and this does not mean criticizing them, or in some some cases, taking legal action if the content does violate laws isn't justified, but rather that it actually needs to be about the book, not an entire genre or group of people. Freedom of association exists for a reason, as do anti-discriminatory laws, because all this does is encourage division. Additionally, Willow has also been abundantly critical of the book Alchemized and has posted several videos about this book. Original TikTok mentions Alchemized in a very negative light. I personally haven't read this book, but in my opinion, this discourse around it is a little bit ridiculous. I've seen multiple people trash on this book for no other reason than it was originally a Harry Potter fanfiction. Everyone is entitled to have their own opinion and make decisions on what they are willing to read. But this author is not J.K. Rowling, and the actions of someone else should not be wielded against this author, because in no way, shape, or form is Senlin Yu, who might I add is non-binary, responsible for what J.K. Rowling has said, because they are quite literally one of the people being targeted. Yes, I get the argument that the marketing around Hermione has led to some people to pick up the original series, but so has Harry Potter World, so has the original movies, so has Amazon advertising the new audiobooks or the new play which the original actor for Draco Malfoy is starring in. And yes, the publishing industry has also used this inappropriately, because the intention behind the Hermione books has largely been for the authors to distance themselves from fanfiction in the Harry Potter community because of these problematic views, and also in particular for Senlin Yu to reclaim their work which has been sold for profit illegally online. For me, this is like trying to argue that any book influenced by H.P. Lovecraft, which is a lot of horror books, is supporting his problematic view. Once again, it's fine not to like the book or to want to read it or to criticize it, because I know it's dark and it talks about a lot of gory and dark themes that are not going to work for a lot of readers. But Senlin Yu is not responsible for J.K. Rowling's transphobia, and in my opinion relates back to what I was saying earlier about how Willow is more willing to approach books with nuance when they relate to her own identities, and that she is also more critical towards books she perceives as negatively affecting her identities, and this is not wrong. I think it's reasonable to be upset about books that are offensive towards you, but the ceaseless hatred Willow has been taking against Senlin Yu, who themselves is also a fellow victim of J.K. Rowling's transphobia, is not okay. All of this, I think, just shows that we all need to be more critical about the way that we engage with books, and also more critical about how our perspectives are subjective, because I think the main issue here, and what Willow has tried to ignore by fully shielding herself from any blame or accountability for this situation, is that we all need to realize that our own opinions are exactly that. They're our own opinions, and they do not apply universally to everyone. And I think that taking this approach that everyone has to have the same interpretation of a book as you, and if they don't, that they're problematic, that they're harmful, and then they deserve to be attacked online, is wrong. And I don't get why that's such like a hard concept for people to understand, that your opinion is not at the center of this universe. And I think it's justified for everyone to be upset about this situation. But I just don't get how we even got to this place in the first place, where we can't interact respectfully with each other. We are called the book community for a reason, because we are all people united by a common love for books and reading. Don't get how we have lost that sense of community that was so core towards building it to the extent that it is now. And maybe it seems like I'm a little bit like stepping up on the soapbox, and maybe I'm just as bad as Willow. Maybe I'm speaking condescendingly. I'm not meaning to, but I just think that we are the ones with the power to change how we interact with each other in our own community. And I feel like the book community for me has been such a liberating place, and a place of finding my own identity and asserting my own voice, especially with having my own channel. I've been able to talk about issues that are important to me, about books that I've loved, books that I didn't like, and to interact with others as well. It's kind of painful to see that these good aspects about our community be twisted and be used to promote such hateful rhetoric. Why we read books is because they help us to understand the world. I've read so many books that have widened my perspective of the world world immensely. I've been able to live, as George R. R. Martin says, 1,000 lives through the pages of books. I've been able to meet characters and explore worlds that I never would have been able to, and I've been able to learn so much about my own world through this. And I don't understand why the community is so vitriolic against each other, because just as we've all journeyed through 1,000 worlds, we've done so together. And our steps and our journeys through the world are going to be different, just as they are different in the real world. Because for me, books and reading is like it's having a conversation. You're bringing your own experiences, so is the author, and so is the book itself. And all of you are sitting together at a table conversing about things. And the book community, both in person and online, allows us to bring this to even wider scale, where we're able to take our own perspective and own interpretations of a book, the author's interpretations and intentions in writing them, and discuss them with everyone whose own opinions are so different as well, because they themselves are different people than us. And that's such a beautiful thing that I feel like should be used to unite us and be used as a way to learn about new opinions and new perspectives that we might not have been considered, rather than to endlessly attack people for just having different opinions. And I understand why people were defensive about it. The way that Willow was talking was very condescending and extremely rude. And for many of us Romantasy readers who are largely women who have probably felt our intelligence questioned before, and also for us readers who, because of society's idea that reading is quote-unquote nerdy, have also probably been bullied just for being interested in reading in general, it is insulting. But I don't think that's any excuse to promote the same hateful rhetoric against someone else. And I think that if you're going to be criticizing someone for being hateful, that you need to act as the bigger person and the better person. Now, this doesn't mean that Willow didn't deserve to be called out. She did. And I personally dislike how she hasn't really seemed to have taken accountability for anything that she's done, and has used other parts of her identity to sort of shield from blame. I've talked about that before in the Age of Scorpius situation and was critical towards it, so I think the same carries through here. But all of us here would be better served by just being kinder to one another. I don't think that's a wrong or problematic thing to say. It genuinely seems like literally asking people to be nice nowadays is such a big issue, and personally I don't really understand it. That is my main takeaway from this, is be nice to people, because that is what our books tell us to do. Our books tell us to explore and to learn of new perspectives, and I think having a variety of perspectives and subjective interpretations only helps to make our book community better. And I don't think that this means that we can't be critical towards each other, but I do think it means that we can be respectful in our critiques and always try and see where the other person is coming from instead of endlessly attacking. So on that note, I'm going to end this video. I don't know how well I was really presenting information or giving my thoughts about things, but I think that this is a really important issue to talk about, and I hope that this experience and this drama can be used as a learning opportunity for everyone to be better. This is not an isolated incident. This is honestly just feels like yet another occurrence in a very long line. I think it just harms our community at large, whereas we should be building each other up instead. And once again, we can still be critical and be nice about it. So going off of that topic as well, if you have any criticism about this video or any discussion you want to raise, feel free to leave it down in the comments, but please be nice about it. And that includes being nice towards Willow, to be nice towards me, to be nice towards others who might be involved in this, as that was kind of the main takeaway from this video. And once again, I hope you enjoyed it, and goodbye.